The holdout Bash Johnson stood before a wall of glass, his city spread out beneath him like a circuit board of ambition and light. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back. From this height, people were specks, cars were silent glimmers, and the world was a series of assets and liabilities. Right now, one particular liability was causing a profound, grating dissonance in his otherwise perfectly ordered universe. On his desk, a sprawling architectural model showed a vision of the future. The Apex Casino and Resort, a breathtaking complex of glass towers, shimmering pools, and curated luxury. And there, right in the center of the model, was a single, stubborn, empty lot. A blank space where a modest, two-story house still stood. He turned from the window, his movements stiff with controlled frustration. He picked up a thin file from his desk, the contents as baffling as they were infuriating. 5 million, he said aloud, his voice echoing in the vast, silent office. Then 8, then 10. He dropped the file. It contained the polite, unequivocal refusals from one Brittany Mclaine. It's a $700,000 property on its best day. What does she want? His assistant, a man named Robert, stood by the door, sensing the rhetorical nature of the question, but feeling compelled to answer. We've offered relocation, a penthouse in the new tower, cash. There's no counteroffer. Just no. Bash's jaw tightened. He was a man who understood leverage, pressure points, and motivation. Everyone had a price, or a weakness. This woman was an equation he hadn't solved. I don't accept that there's no reason, he said, his tone final. Find it. I don't care how. I want to know everything about her. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of the house on Cedar Lane, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was clean but worn, the linoleum floor faded in pathways of a life lived within its walls. Brittany Mclaine moved through the quiet space with a practiced, weary efficiency. She scrambled eggs, her movements economical. At 23, her face held a gravity that belonged to someone much older. Her eyes, a steady and serious blue, constantly checked the perimeter of her world. Chelsea, 5 minutes, she called up the stairs. A muffled groan was the reply. A moment later, Chelsea appeared, her backpack slung over one shoulder. At 14, she was all sharp angles and quiet observation, her eyes mirroring her sister's wariness. She slid into a chair at the small kitchen table, her gaze drifting to a framed photograph on the wall. It showed a smiling woman with their same eyes, her arms around a younger Brittany and a tiny Chelsea. Their mother, Elaine. Brittany placed a plate of eggs in front of her sister. Eat. You too, Chelsea said, not looking away from the photo. I will. Brittany never did, not until Chelsea was at school. Their conversation was a series of quiet, coded exchanges. Did you finish the history reading? Most of it. You need to finish all of it. I know. After clearing the plates, Brittany walked to the living room window. She didn't need to look far to see the future Bash Johnson was trying to build. Construction fencing wrapped around her property like a noose. Giant billboards depicted the glittering Apex Casino, a monument to everything her home was not. She placed a hand flat against the cool glass of the window pane, a silent, defiant promise. Not while I'm here. Back in his office, Bash opened the new, thicker file Robert had placed on his desk. It was confidential, the kind of information obtained through channels that preferred to remain in the shadows. He began to read, and the sterile facts on the page began to paint a picture of a tragedy. Elaine Mclaine. A vibrant, kind-faced woman. From the photos in the file, she had remarried a man named Robert 4 years ago. The marriage had deteriorated quickly. Police reports noted domestic disturbances. Then, the final report. A 911 call from a terrified 18-year-old Brittany. An argument escalated. Robert, in a drunken rage, had attacked Elaine with a fireplace poker. The murder had occurred in the living room of the house on Cedar Lane. Bash's fingers stilled on the page. He read about the aftermath, the foster care system. Brittany, just a child herself, fighting through the courts for 2 years to gain full custody of her 9-year-old sister. The house was the only asset, the only thing left of their mother. It was more than wood and nails. It was a crime scene, a sanctuary, and a shield. For Chelsea, a girl who had lost everything, it was the sole symbol of stability left in the world. He leaned back in his chair, the expensive leather groaning softly. The frustration that had coiled in his stomach for weeks unraveled, replaced by a cold, heavy weight of understanding. He had been trying to buy a piece of real estate. She was defending a gravesite and a fortress. He thought of the leverage he now possessed, the traumatic history, the potential instability for a minor. He could use it. A single, well-placed call to a social services contact. He closed the file. He pushed it away to the far corner of his desk. He would not make that call. The next day, Bash's car pulled up not to his office, but to Cedar Lane. He was alone, dressed in simple, dark trousers and a button-down shirt, no tie. He found Brittany in the side yard, wrestling with a section of the wooden fence that had come loose in the last windstorm. She was straining to hold a post upright, her face flushed with effort. She saw him and froze, her guard slamming back, into place. "What do you want?" "I came to talk," he said, his hands held slightly away from his body. "Without a contract." "The answer is the same." "I see that." He gestured to the fence. "Let me help you with that." Her laugh was short and humorless. "I don't need your help. You're one person trying to hold up a 6-foot post and nail it in place. You need another pair of hands." He took a step closer. "I'm not offering to buy it. I'm offering to fix it." The distinction hung in the air between them. She studied him, her eyes searching for the trap. Finally, with a tense sigh of surrender to physics, she nodded. "Fine." He worked in silence, his movements strong and capable. He held the post steady, while she hammered the braces into place. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the hammer was the only sound for a long time. When it was done, he brushed the dirt from his hands. "Thank you," she said, the words seeming to surprise her as much as him. He simply nodded. "The latch on." "Your gate is also broken. I can bring my tools tomorrow." She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. He returned the next day, as he said he would, a metal toolbox in hand. The sky was a flat, pale gray, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the large oak tree in the front yard. Brittany watched from the window as he parked his car, a different, less ostentatious model than the first one she'd seen, and walked up the path. He didn't go to the front door. He went directly to the side gate, assessing the broken latch with a practiced eye. After a long moment of hesitation, Brittany came outside. She stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said without looking up. He was already selecting a screwdriver from the box. "But it needs to be done, and I said I would." He worked with a quiet focus she hadn't expected. There was no arrogance in his movements, only a deliberate competence. He removed the old, rusted hardware, cleaned out the screw holes in the weathered wood, and began fitting the new latch. The back door creaked open, and Chelsea stepped out, a textbook in her hand. She stopped, her eyes wide with curiosity, and leaned against the doorframe, watching him. Bash glanced up, meeting her gaze. He gave a small, brief nod but didn't stop his work. He didn't try to charm her or fill the silence with empty words. He just continued, methodically tightening the screws. "You're good at that," Chelsea observed after a few minutes, her voice quiet. "I used to work construction," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A long time ago, before the suits in the offices." This piece of information seemed to surprise Brittany more than anything else. She uncrossed her arms. "You did?" "My father was a contractor. I spent my summers carrying lumber." He finished with the latch and tested it. It clicked shut firmly. "There, that should hold." He packed his tools away. As he stood, his eyes fell on the large oak tree, its branches stretching protectively over the roof of the house. "That's a good tree. A white oak. They're strong. They last." "It was our mom's favorite," Chelsea said softly, before Brittany could stop her. Bash's gaze softened as he looked at the tree, then at Chelsea, and finally, at Brittany. He saw the flicker of pain in Brittany's eyes, the fierce protectiveness. He simply nodded again, a silent acknowledgement of the shared weight of the memory. "It's a good thing to hold on to," he said. Then he picked up his toolbox. "The faucet in the kitchen drips. I heard it last time. I can look at it next week if you want." He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked back to his car, leaving the two sisters standing in the yard, the new latch on the gate a solid, undeniable fact. The following week, he fixed the faucet. The week after, he repaired a loose baluster on the porch railing. His visits became a strange, unspoken ritual. He would arrive, do a specific, useful task, share a few minutes of quiet conversation, and then leave. The conversations were never about the casino. He asked about Chelsea's school. Brittany, cautiously, asked about his work in construction. He spoke of blistered hands and hot summers, a life that felt a universe away from the man in the skyscraper. One evening, after he had replaced a cracked pane of glass in the basement window, they found themselves sitting on the top step of the porch as dusk settled around them. The air was cool, and the first fireflies of the season blinked in the shadows of the yard. "It must have been hard," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the distant city skyline, his own tower among them, at 18, taking on all of that. Brittany was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. She pulled her knees to her chest. "There wasn't a choice," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She's my sister. It was the only thing I could do for my mom. Keep us together. Keep this." She gestured vaguely at the house behind them. He looked at her then, truly looked at her in the fading light. He saw not a stubborn obstacle, but a monument of resilience. "My father died when I was 16, he found himself saying, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. He never spoke of this. Heart attack. No life insurance. Nothing. My mother, she worked 3 jobs. We lost our house. I swore I would never feel that powerless again. That's where all this," he gestured, toward the glittering city, started, from a place of fear. It was the most honest thing he had said to her, perhaps to anyone, in years. The space between them on the porch step seemed to shrink, charged with a new, profound understanding. They were both, in their own ways, building fortresses. His were made of steel and glass. Hers was made of memory and love. A week later, the storm hit. It was a violent, sudden squall that tore through the neighborhood. Wind howled and rain lashed against the windows. Brittany and huddled in the living room, the sound of the old house groaning around them. Then came a loud, sickening crack, followed by the shattering of glass. A large limb from the oak tree had broken off and crashed through the window of Brittany's bedroom. Panic seized her. Rain was pouring in, soaking the floor, the wind whipping the curtains. She fumbled for her phone, her mind racing with who to call, how much it would cost. Headlights cut through the sheeting rain. A car door slammed. Moments later, Bash was at the front door, his hair and clothes plastered to his skin. "I was nearby," he said, though that was a lie. He had been in his penthouse, watching the storm, and thought immediately of the old house on Cedar Lane. What happened? He took charge with a calm authority that quieted Brittany's fear. He found a tarp in his trunk and, battling the wind, managed to secure it over the broken window from the outside, stemming the flood. Inside, he helped her move the soaked rug and furniture, his movements efficient and sure. In the chaos of mopping, up water, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same bucket. It was a simple, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt through both of them. They both stilled. The sound of the storm faded into the background. Brittany looked up, her face pale and streaked with rain or tears, her breath catching. Bash's hand hovered near hers, his gaze intense, searching her face. For a long, suspended moment, the world consisted only of that point of contact and the unspoken thing blooming between them in the wreckage of the storm. The story continues, the pace measured, and the tone solemn. The calm that followed the air storm was fragile. Bash had stayed until the immediate crisis was over, the window boarded up, the water mopped away. The air in the house was thick with the smell of damp wood and the unspoken tension of that single charged moment. He had left with a quiet promise to send a professional glazier in the morning, refusing any offer of payment. For the next 2 days, a strange quiet settled over the house. Brittany moved through her routines, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the feel of his hand against hers, the look in his eyes that had held something far more complex than pity or strategy. She was wary, yet a part of her, a part she had locked away for years, dared to hope. Chelsea, however, had grown increasingly quiet. She watched her sister with a sharp, analytical focus. The man's sudden, convenient appearance during the storm, his quiet competence, the way Brittany's shoulders seemed to lose some of their permanent tension when he was around. It all felt too perfect. It felt like a story, and Chelsea had learned that most stories were too good to be true. Sitting at the computer in the school library during her free period, her fingers flew across the keyboard. She typed Bash Johnson into the search bar. The screen flooded with results. News articles, press releases, corporate profiles. His face, stern and commanding, looked back at her from a dozen websites. She clicked on a business journal article about the Apex project. There it was, a map of the proposed development, and right in the center, a glaring, empty spot, the exact shape of their property. Her blood ran cold. She read about the legal battles, the acquisitions, the single holdout property that was stalling the entire billion-dollar project. The article didn't name them, but it didn't have to. The truth crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't there to help. He was there to conquer. She waited until they were back home in the safety of their kitchen, the heart of the fortress he was trying to dismantle from the inside. His name is Bash Johnson, Chelsea said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. Brittany, who was washing dishes, went very still. What? Bash Johnson, Chelsea repeated, her words coming faster, sharper. He's building the casino, the Apex. Our house is the only thing left in his way. She shoved the printouts from the library across the counter. He's not helping us, Britt. He's manipulating us. He's trying to get you to trust him so you'll just hand it over. Brittany's hands were still submerged in the soapy water. She looked at the printed images, the maps, the face of the man who had fixed her fence, shared a quiet moment on her porch, held her gaze in the storm. The foundation of the fragile trust they had built crumbled in an instant, replaced by the cold, hard cement of betrayal. The walls of her home, which had begun to feel less like a fortress and more like a home again, suddenly felt paper-thin, besieged. No, she whispered, but it was a sound of realization, not denial. The memory of his touch now felt like a violation. His confession about his father, a calculated lie to gain her sympathy. She pulled her hands from the water, wiping them on a towel with slow, deliberate movements, as if trying to scrub away the feeling of his skin. When he came the next day, as he always did, she was waiting for him on the porch. Her posture was rigid, her face a mask of cold fury. The repaired latch was between them, a monument to his deception. He started to speak, a faint, hopeful smile on his lips. I spoke with the glazier. They can... Bash Johnson, she interrupted, her voice like ice. Of Johnson Holdings, developer of the Apex Casino. All the color drained from his face. The smile vanished. Brittany? Was it a game? She asked, her voice rising, sharp with a pain she could no longer contain. See how far you could get? See if you could charm the poor, tragic girl into giving up her home? Fix a faucet? Share? A sad story and wait for me to roll over? It wasn't like that, he said, his own voice low, urgent. Not at the beginning, but what? She demanded, taking a step forward, her eyes blazing. When did it stop being a strategy? When you realized how broken we were? Was that the key? Find the weakness and exploit it? He looked at her, at the raw hurt in her eyes, and the words, to defend himself, crumbled in his mouth. How could he explain the shift inside him? How could he articulate that the project had become secondary, that the sight of her face had become the point? It sounded like just another lie, even to him. His silence was the final damning confirmation. "Get off my property," she said, each word a shard of glass. "And don't ever come back." He stood there for a long moment, defeated. He had lost. Not the property, but something infinitely more valuable. He gave a single curt nod, turned, and walked away. The sound of his car door closing and the engine starting was the sound of a door slamming shut. The silence in Bash's penthouse was absolute. The glittering city below, his kingdom of steel and light, felt hollow. He stood at the same window, from which he had first surveyed his domain, but now he saw only one small, darkened patch of land where a single light burned in a kitchen window. He had tried to possess it, and in the process, he had shattered the only real thing that had entered his life in years. The file on Brittany Mclaine lay open on his desk. He did not see leverage anymore. He saw a photograph of a smiling mother. He saw a police report that detailed a nightmare. He saw the fierce, protective love of a sister. He had offered them money, and then he had offered them kindness, and both had been tainted by his own ambition. A press conference was scheduled for the next morning. His team was prepared to announce the final phase of the Apex project, along with a new aggressive strategy of legal eminent domain to acquire the final property. The documents were drafted, the arguments sound. He picked up the phone. His voice was quiet but absolute when he spoke to his head of public relations. "Cancel the press conference, draft a new announcement. The Apex project is being indefinitely suspended." The stunned silence on the other end of the line was palpable. "Sir? The investors? The board? Tell them I've reassessed the viability. Tell them whatever you need to. The project is dead." He ended the call before the protests could fully form. He had spent a lifetime building monuments to his own power to silence the ghost of a powerless boy. But true power, he was finally beginning to understand, was not in taking what you wanted. It was in letting go. Inside the house on Cedar Lane, cardboard boxes were stacked in the living room. The air smelled of dust and resignation. Photographs were taken down from the walls, wrapped carefully in newspaper. "We don't have to do this, Britt," Chelsea said, her voice small. "Yes, we do," Brittany replied, her tone firm but her eyes sad. "This house, it's a monument to the worst thing that ever happened to us. We've been holding on to a ghost. It's time to let her go. It's time for us to have a future that isn't built on this one terrible spot." She was packing away the past, not because she had been defeated, but because she had finally found the strength to choose a different path. She would sell the house on her own terms, use the money to buy a new place, a clean place, for her and Chelsea. It was the ultimate act of defiance, not against Bash Johnson, but against the tragedy that had held them captive for so long. It was on one of these final afternoons that a car pulled up outside. Brittany's heart hammered against her ribs. A foolish, traitorous hope she instantly suppressed. She opened the door to find Bash standing there. He looked older, the lines on his face more deeply etched. He held no toolbox, no contract. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said, his voice low. "I just came to tell you that you don't have to leave. The Apex project is canceled. The casino will not be built. Your house, your home, is safe." Brittany stared at him, the words not quite making sense. "Canceled? I realize some things can't be bought and shouldn't be." His gaze was steady, filled with a regret so profound it was like a physical presence between them. "I am sorry, Brittany, for everything." He turned to leave, his sacrifice offered without any expectation of reward. It was the first truly selfless thing she had ever seen him do. "Wait," he stopped. "I'm still selling the house," she said, her voice clear. He turned back, confusion on his face. "But I'm selling it to you." Now it was his turn to stare, utterly lost. "This was my mother's favorite place," she explained, her gaze drifting to the large oak tree in the yard. "But it hasn't been ours. For a long time. Not really. We need a new start." but I won't sell it to someone who will just tear it down. She looked back at him, her eyes holding his. I'll sell it to you, on the condition that you preserve this house. That you leave the oak tree standing. That you make sure whoever lives here next understands that it was loved. It was not a surrender. It was a treaty, a passing of the torch. She was not giving him what he wanted. She was entrusting him with what she cherished. In doing so, she was freeing them both. Bash looked at the house, then at the fierce, extraordinary woman before him. He understood. He nodded slowly. The house will stand. The tree will remain. You have my word. There were no grand declarations, no promises of a future. They stood there as the sun began to set, two people who had met as adversaries and parted as something else entirely. Two people who had, against all odds, found a way to heal a small piece of each other's broken world. Brittany and Chelsea moved into a small, sunlit apartment across town a month later. It held no ghosts, only future. One evening, Brittany received a single, unmarked envelope. Inside was a photograph of the house on Cedar Lane. The oak tree was still there, its leaves a vibrant green. The house stood clean and repaired, a light glowing warmly in the window. On the back, a single word was written in a familiar, strong hand, preserved. She placed the photograph on her new mantle, not as a chain to the past, but as a reminder of her own strength. The story of the holdout was over. The story of her life was just beginning. And somewhere in the city, a powerful man looked at a simple house on a quiet street, and it remained, not as a monument to his failure, but as a quiet testament to the one thing he could not build, but had to earn. A place where someone had once been truly, fiercely loved. Weeks turned into a quiet, separate existence. Brittany focused on building a new life for herself and Chelsea in their airy apartment. It was a clean slate, but the silence there was different from the heavy silence of the old house. This silence was full of potential. Yet, a part of her felt unresolved, a melody left hanging on an unfinished chord. She found herself walking past the old neighborhood one afternoon, pulled by a force she couldn't name. She stopped at a distance. The house was still there, just as he had promised. The oak tree stood tall and proud, but it wasn't empty. Fresh paint trimmed the windows, and pots of hardy winter flowers sat on the porch. It was being cared for, not as a museum piece, but as a home. As she stood there, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Bash got out. He didn't go inside immediately. Instead, he walked to the oak tree, placing a hand on its rough bark in a gesture that was both greeting and reverence. Then he turned, as if he had sensed her presence all along. His gaze found hers across the distance. He didn't wave or smile. He simply began to walk toward her. Her first instinct was to flee, to protect the fragile piece she had built. But her feet remained rooted to the pavement. He stopped a few feet from her, his hands in his coat pockets. "You came back," he said, his voice low. "I needed to see," she replied. "You kept your word. I told you I would." He paused, choosing his next words with immense care. "The foundation is setting up a scholarship in your mother's name. For young adults who have aged out of the foster system. We used the initial acquisition budget to fund it." The air left Brittany's lungs. It was more than preserving a house. It was honoring a legacy. It was an apology woven into something meaningful and lasting. The last of her defenses crumbled, not into weakness, but into a profound, aching understanding. "Why?" she whispered, the word carrying the weight of all their history. "Because you were right," he said, taking a tentative step closer. "I started this wanting to take something from you. But you made me want to be someone who deserved to be given something. You saw the man I was before I built the towers, and you didn't look away in pity. You saw a person. I haven't been seen in a very long time." Tears she had refused to shed for years welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. "I'm not the man I was when I first came to your door, Brittany," he continued, his voice raw with emotion. "You changed the blueprint. You are the foundation of everything I want to build now." He closed the final distance between them. He didn't grab her or presume. He simply raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing away a tear that traced a path down her cheek. His touch was warm, certain, and filled with a reverence that shattered her completely. This time, when their lips met, it was not an accident born of chaos. It was a deliberate, slow, and perfect seal on a promise. It was a kiss of goodbye to the pain of the past and a hello to a future they would choose. It held the memory of cold bus stops and storm-shattered windows, of quiet conversations, on a porch and the profound sacrifice of letting go. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. When they parted, they stood forehead to forehead, their breath misting in the cold air, a new world having been born in the space between them. "Come to dinner," he said softly. "With me and Chelsea. Not in a penthouse, at my home, the one I live in." Brittany looked into his eyes and saw the future, clear and definite, spelled out not in contracts, but in the unwavering certainty of his gaze. She saw shared meals and quiet evenings. She saw a man who would not just care for her, but for her sister, who would become a part of their small, fiercely guarded family. She saw a partnership of equals, built on the rubble of their pasts. "Yes," she said, the single word, a vow. And as they stood together on the sidewalk, the house that had been a holdout against the world stood witness behind them, no longer a fortress, but a symbol. It was the place where two wounded souls had drawn a line in the sand, and in defending it, had found something infinitely more valuable than land or money. They had found each other. Their story was no longer about what they had lost, but about everything they had yet to build together. If this story of resilience and redemption found a place with you, then you have a home within the Worthington Chronicles. We are a sanctuary for those who seek stories with soul. Here, we believe that the most compelling dramas are not found in fantastical realms, but in the human heart. We craft narratives where love is a quiet strength, where characters are sculpted by their scars, and where every happy ending is hard-won. Subscribe to the Worthington Chronicles and join our community of listeners. Find your next emotional journey with us. Don't forget to ring the bell so you're here for the next chapter.